Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai, and a warm welcome everybody to our new extraordinary council meeting for Wednesday, the 13th of December 2023. Before I get underway, if I could please ask the Deputy Mayor to open us formally with karakia.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. Ngā mihi ki a koe o tira ki ngā kai kaunihira, to all of the councillors, to all of the staff. Ngā mihi ki a koutou, members of the public also. Nei rā taku mihi matakuikui ki a koutou. A warm welcome to you all this morning. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e hui e, tae ki e. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you. This council meeting is being recorded. It was being live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. In terms of health and safety, unlike the event of an emergency, we'll exit through the running person signs, those green signs, and we assemble downstairs in the clock tower in the square Te Marahine. It is a non-smoking facility, and if there is the need for a defibrillator, it's located in the foyer entrance on the ground floor. Any incidences, please, if we could report those to our committee administration. Right, and officers, if you just in the first instance perhaps just mention your name and title for those online, and we will go through proceedings. Big day today, councillors, so we'll do our best to get through things and appreciate a bit of work's gone in the background to get some recommendations up onto the table. So in terms of apologies, I haven't received any. We've got a full house. There's no addition. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for early departure, if we're not done by 1600, 4 o'clock.
Sorry?
If we're not done by 4 o'clock this afternoon.
We will be.
Thank you.
I haven't received any additional items and nothing from the floor. Declarations of interest, again, I haven't received any and nothing from the floor. And we will now go to the motion to allow us to work through moving motions. So we'll have to suspend those standing orders. We'll get those up. We're changing to option C. It's 2.12.3. Okay, so the motion is to allow flexible debating style for the meeting. Option C, moving motions and amendments, 2.12.3, and it will be around, they can be agreed by a simple majority. So I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. This is pretty straightforward. Are there any comments? There being none, we will vote, please. It's coming. We'll do that then. So we'll just vote on this first. And it's passed 16 votes for and none against. Now I'll come back to you, Councillor Johnson.
Apologies, Mr. Mayor. I should have declared an interest in any resolutions relating to the Acautri, or that could be conceived as relating to the Acautri plan change. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Is that my commissioner?
Yeah, sure, thank you. Noted. So we'll just make a note of that. Okay, we move through to number 5, which is the indicator framework for the LTP plan 24 to 34. And this is just simply to lift the report from the table. Any questions or debate around that can be later in the meeting, and it will be now moved towards the end of the meeting, just because of the amount of work to get through earlier today. So I'm happy to move that we lift the report from the table, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there are no comments, we will vote, please. That is passed 15 votes for. Somebody didn't vote. He's voted for. Okay, thank you. That's passed unanimously. Thank you. Okay, all right, and just to indicate that we will discuss that at the end of the meeting, and for staff in the room, it may not be today, so please don't sit here all day and think that we're going to get to that very quickly, because there's a lot to do. Okay, moving through to number 7, which is the main purpose of today, and it is around the long-term plan prioritisation, around capital projects and expenditure updates, and I invite Bryce Hosking, Scott Manser and David Murphy to speak to that. Gentlemen, over to you.
Good morning, elected members and the Mayor and everyone else. Scott Manser, Acting Chief Financial Officer. So the report is in your agenda, and we're intending on working our way through that. A couple of us will talk to different points through there, and we'll also provide some summaries of the updates that the Chief Executive emailed out through the earlier parts of the week. So following the meeting on the 29th of November, we've taken all the recommendations, the resolutions rather, that were passed and made some changes to those capital programs following those resolutions. We have met all of those resolutions with one minor exception around the capital renewal spend. So the resolution was that we were to have no more than 40 million in year 5. We have landed on 40.13 million. So we're very, very close to that resolution, but we haven't quite met that there. And so that is detailed in 2.3 and 2.4 of your agenda paper. We've also provided a graph showing the increasing trend in line with the intent of that recommendation. While we've been reviewing the schedules, we'd also come across a number of errors, both system and human error, and we have identified them through Table 1 and Table 2 in the agenda item. All of those changes have been made, and we've still managed to meet the resolutions that were passed last week. So where things were added to the renewal program, we have still kept within that renewal program scope, particularly in the years that matter. Are there any questions about that section of the report before I pass over to David to just briefly discuss the Acautri growth information in the paper?
Councillor Johnson.
Just some questions about things that have been moved from strategic to other areas. I can see that there's a reason given for each of them. I guess, how confident are you that what's in critical now and what's in strategic is in the right place, because we'll be relying on those categorisations for making decisions today. And, you know, I guess I know it's not an exact science, but it would be unfortunate if we were to not fund something that was in strategic that subsequently turned out to be critical. So I'd just like some assurance that you're now confident that everything is in the right place in those different appendices.
Yes, we're confident now that everything is in the correct space. So we were alerted to these very late in the piece prior to the last meeting, and that's why we've been upfront about the correction of those. So we are confident we have the categorisation correct in these schedules.
Okay, thank you.
David.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Scott. Just if you could clarify for us around the year 5 and coming very close to 40 million, but not quite to that level. Could you just give us some insight in terms of why it wasn't reached?
I'll probably defer this question to Bryce, but my understanding was we couldn't reduce that year 5 spend without significantly increasing the risk to council around the asset that was going to be replaced, or the risk profile associated with the assets there.
Kia ora, councillors. I'm Bryce Hosking, Group Manager of Property, Resource Recovery and Acting Group Manager of Transport. Essentially, many of those renewal programs were a set amount to do a set piece of work as well, so it wasn't possible to necessarily essentially reduce a program. For instance, if we had to replace a roof and it was $500,000, we needed $500,000. So there was a few of those incidents in there as well. But as Scott rightfully pointed out, really it was a risk-based decision from officers' standpoint, and around increasing that risk to maybe an unacceptable level from an officer's standpoint.
So as sobering as attachment 5 already is, it would have been substantially more sobering if we had actually hit the 40.
I think it would increase the risk of asset failure, and more importantly increase the likelihood of an asset failing before we were able to intervene with a renewal.
Thank you. And in terms of the status now of attachment 1, the resolution identified considering alongside OPEX, which we haven't yet got to, so I assume that, am I correct to assume that today's noting of it is simply a stage on the journey, but we don't really look to endorse until sometime in future?
Yes, that's correct. So the attachment 1 is the updated schedule that reflects that resolution. You'll see later in the paper, which I'll get to shortly, is an indicative rates rise for year 1. But you are correct, we are bringing the operating budgets back to council next week, which will have those figures fed into them with the rolling average renewal rating impact.
Great, excellent. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thanks. Back to you, Scott. We're past that. Oh, sorry, David.
Morena koutou. I'm just going to speak briefly to the points in the report regarding the Akauturi growth programs. So we've been on a bit of a journey with the Akauturi growth program. So prior to LTP, we brought, you recall, we brought a memo to the council that indicated that stronger relationship that now exists between the National Policy Statement, Urban Development, and the LTP, and those programs that are required for Akauturi. Alongside the LTP process, the district plan change hearing for Akauturi has been running. Officers have been conscious of that and the relationship to the NPS UD. The broad advice is still, within the funding constraints to try and provide committed council funding for land that's zoned or about to be zoned, but we appreciate those borrowing constraints. As a reminder, the last time we met on the LTP, I think the Friday before last, there was a resolution to defer all those Akauturi growth programs from, external funding for Akauturi growth programs from year 4. We appreciate that decision and why it was made. What we have come back with, bearing in mind the conversations that have been happening at the plan change hearing, is a sort of slightly more nuanced set of recommendations about the way in which the growth programs for Akauturi could be funded that recognises the NPS UD. And broadly summarising those, it's that stormwater would be external IFF or a developer agreement working with the landowners, likewise with local reserves, the purchase of land, but the actual development of the reserves would still be council funded. The water supply and wastewater would be still council funded in the LTP, given that those programs had a broader benefit, and likewise with the transport ones, although the transport ones, based on the evidence, we've been able to recommend that they shift out 3 or 4 years. So the consequence of all of that means that that the earlier resolution of council removed $37 million of borrowing, and the revised recommendations removed $32.2 million. So we feel those sort of slightly nuanced recommendations minimise the risk of the plan change commissioners identifying a concern about the relationship between the NPSUD and the LTP funding. There's still an element of a risk that that the commissioners may feel that there's not a strong enough commitment to the funding, but that we've reduced that risk through those revised recommendations. Lastly, depending on what happens during the course of the day, in terms of the information that was in the email last night and the revenue decisions you make, if you do end up reflecting back on attachments 1 to 3 at any time during the course of today, then you may want to think about some potential further changes to a kotiri. But for the time being, we feel that the revised recommendations minimise that risk as best we can within the borrowing envelope available.
All right, I've just some questions coming. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, David. I just wanted to clarify how much borrowing is being removed. 3.6 says 38 million, as opposed to 37 of the original recommendations.
Yeah, so you'll recall after this order paper was issued, we issued an updated set of attachments, and there was an email question from Councillor Barrett that identified some Ashurst and Kaka Tangeata programs that should have been identified as external funding. When we were checking that, we identified that the water and wastewater programs, which total 5.8 million, had been shown as external funding in the original attachment 2, when they should have been council borrowing. So if you take that 5.8 off the 38, which is shown in the updated attachment 2, you get to 32 million.
Thanks for the clarification, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thanks to Councillor Bowen for getting my first question out of the way. Development agreements, have we used these before? I'm not so familiar with them as a mechanism.
We haven't. They are explicitly anticipated in the sort of development contributions legislation and policy. So in short, the way they operate is rather than the council borrowing money, providing infrastructure and then collecting it via development contributions from the landowner, you effectively work directly with the landowner on the provision of that infrastructure. It tends to work best where the infrastructure is site specific, rather than so our city reserves, our transport network, our water and our wastewater network are typically like city-wide networks, whereas our stormwater and local reserves are more catchment or local development specific. So that's the background to the slightly more nuanced recommendations.
So are other councils using these? I mean, are they a well-proven mechanism in New Zealand? They're
emerging more and more, effectively because more and more councils are having to think harder about the way in which we facilitate development within the constraints of council and developers. So.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thank you. Thank you, David. You talk about in number 4, it is recommended about the Wakakatahi funding of 51%. Is that still likely with this project going forward?
Yeah, what we have suggested and been talking to Waka Kotahi about is that in year one, when you get to the operational budget, there's a business case being proposed to look at the relationship of Akautiri, Summerhill Drive, State Highway 57. So Waka Kotahi have signalled support for working with us on that business case to then inform those, funding decisions about transport upgrades later on. So at this stage, we think that's a reasonable assumption, particularly given Waka Kotahi have signalled that they'd support us working with them on a business case.
So you're saying the funding's not guaranteed, it's more about working on a business case rather than the funding being guaranteed?
Well, the way Waka Kotahi works is they, for these types of programs, they're more likely to issue or support co-funding if you've been through a business case process. So what we're suggesting is if we go through that business case process, the outcomes of that would inform future LTP. For the time being, funding is, I think, from year 4 or 5 for transport. So at this stage, we think it's a reasonable assumption that we'll get co-funding for those projects.
And if we don't get the co-funding, the council has to pay for it?
Or you don't do it.
Okay.
Every other councillor is faced with exactly the same equation.
Perhaps just to add to that, so standard practice for NZTA is any project over $2 million requires a business case. So even this approach that we're taking here is well within the standard practice that they require whenever we look to do that. So it's not like it's anything revolutionary.
That's the current practice. It's changing by the day. Councillor Isabella.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ngā mihi koutou. Just coming off Councillor Barrett's question about developer agreements and development contributions, I'm just curious to know, will we recover the interest portion that we would pay on debt raised for this type of infrastructure through development contributions, or just on the capital part, if you like?
It's a very good question, and something we're investigating. We had a meeting yesterday just on this. At present, we don't collect the interest costs for the borrowings that we do for growth programs. There are an increasing number of councils that are looking at that or starting to do that. So we're in the process of reviewing some other policies and getting some advice on that as part of the work that's happening alongside the LTP on the development contributions policy.
Thank you.
Sorry, just one thing I would say is what we do is adjust the fees on an annual basis. So while we set the fees every 3 years, they are adjusted annually against CPI.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mr Mayor.
So David, just on that, when do we set the DCs again for and specifically around around everything, but around residential?
Yeah, so once we've got a confirmed capital program, then we can run the DCs and bring a policy back for council to consider in early February. We can provide an update potentially as part of the meetings between now and Christmas, based on the earlier council workshops that we had prior to going into the more formal meetings. We talked about some changes to the DC policy. So we've got some staff working as we speak on running some different scenarios to the policy that look at shifting some of the costs to residential from non-residential and looking at some more tailored approaches to non-residential. There are some complications and risks associated with all of that, but we will be running some scenarios and bringing that back to you.
Does that include lifting the residential significantly?
Yes, within the bounds of that's the I guess the objective that we've tasked the team with looking at in terms of running the scenarios at the moment. Bearing in mind we do DCs are something that are highly contentious and get tested through the process. So we need to just be very comfortable that the assumptions that we're making about how we shift some of that from non-residential to residential are robust and able to withstand questions. But that's what we've tasked the team with looking at.
Okay. I wasn't really talking about shifting it, but anyway, I mean,
Well-
we'll see what comes back to you. I mean, it was clearly we're some of the lowest in the country in terms of residential. I just wondered, we've got all these challenges around funding growth in a residential area. Surely we're looking at maybe tweaking that.
Yeah, sorry if I misinterpreted the question. We're certainly, ultimately the DC fees are determined significantly by how much growth costs the council's incurring. So decisions we're making about how much growth we're funding or not funding will have a direct correlation to the fees as well. So that is something to bear in mind, because if you are signalling that things will be funded through a developer agreement, then they don't sit in the DC policy.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
interrelationships between all of these decisions, but there are other means and ways that we can make sure our DC fees are more comparable to the rest of the country and reasonable in terms of the funding issues the council's facing.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And just one final question, just which Councillor Barrett touched on. So developer agreements, ultimately, I mean, you did answer it, I suppose, in a sense that it's ring-fenced around either a site or a particular area, but you generally do it with a small amount of people too, wouldn't you? It wouldn't be carte blanche. Like if you've got an area which has only got one or two developers, you would perhaps look at that, or is that a mechanism?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, actually, is that while it's specific to an area, the less landowners you've got, the better in terms of developer agreements. For large areas like Kakatangiata, where you've got multiple landowners, it's probably virtually impossible.
Yeah.
Where you have one or two major landowners, then it's a much more realistic outcome, because ultimately, as we say in the papers, they're incentivised to provide the infrastructure, otherwise they can't develop. But it does require a lot more negotiation about what infrastructure is provided, the quality of it, the design, because that's typically something that's, if the council's providing it, it's the council decision. So.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You've sparked a question for me. So, let's say Kakatangiata is taken into an IFF. What is the process for development contributions when the payments go into an IFF? Does council leverage the development contribution and then make it as a payment to that vehicle? And if so, have the development contributions for those areas been removed from our income, given they'll be being paid to an IFF as a part of our long-term assumptions?
Yeah, another good question, and something that we've been turning our mind to. We can't probably give you a firm answer until we'd have conversations with Crown Infrastructure Partners, but our current assumption would be that they would stay with the IFF separate from the developer agreement. I think the developer agreement's different because, as I said, it's a specific area. That they would stay in the development contributions policy. We would collect those development contributions as development happens, assuming Crown Infrastructure Partners IFF supported the Kakatangiata growth programs, would then be obliged to, obviously, as we collect that revenue, pass it over to CIP or some other party that's providing the external revenue.
And so have we removed those development contributions from our income assumptions, given that'll have a, I imagine, reasonably notable impact on our debt headroom?
Not for our current thinking is that we will not remove them from development contributions for IFF funded projects, but we would for our developer agreements.
Right. I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, back to you, Scott.
Cool. So moving on through the paper, to items 5. Last meeting, council resolved to increase the net debt limit from 200 to 250% of revenue. So we've provided some further information on some assumptions that feed into that, and I get this is going to be the crux of the conversation for today. So the next couple of sections and tables and all the attachments sort of all correlate into this point. So hopefully you can follow me through, and I'll try not to jump around too much, but we'll talk you through things and then start on some questions. So to calculate the available debt for council, we have put an assumption around the total operating revenue increases annually. So that's in table 3. So we have 11% for year 1, and then 7% or 8% years 2 and 3, and then 7% annually thereafter. It is very important to note that that is not the rates increase for those years. This is total operating revenue, so it includes rates, fees and charges, grants and subsidies received, as well as any interest revenue. So it is all revenue streams feeding into that assumption. You'll see from item 5.8 and 5.9 that there is a snapshot of the year one rates increase to provide some context around that higher number in year one. What is happening in year one, given rates is higher than that 11%, is other revenue streams aren't increasing to the same level as rates. So that is a one-off error in some previous budgets where we have some incorrect revenue assumptions. So as those get removed, the base number actually reduced, so the percentage increase is smaller. As part of the financial strategy that we're also working on, and we'll come back to council in February, we would like to indicate that through the outer years, being 4 to 10, that we would accelerate debt repayments, and this would also help with the headroom that we're about to talk about. If we apply the revenue assumptions through the 10 years, and in table 4 we show that would allow council to have a total debt available by the end of year 10 of 852 million. We then go on and show the breakdown of how some of that debt is, and now is probably a good time to talk about the email that the Chief Executive sent to you last night around the mathematical error. So the table, when we prepared the paper, was gross debt. What we had forgotten to do was account for the 176 million of debt repayments into those figures. The update, now I'm going to jump between attachments, sorry everybody. The update provided in attachment 6 under the separate agenda has the available funding of 183 million. We need to add the 176 million to that figure. So the total is now 359, if I've done maths right in my head, for council, for projects across the life of the plan. That does rely on the revenue assumption as it is at 7% from years 4 to 10. And also the current funding assumptions throughout the annexes that are provided in your agenda and the released items. Are there any questions on that? That's quite probably a bit to get your head around, but does that sort of all make sense to everyone?
Yes and no. And can I just, I mean, in theory it sounds good, but we make some pretty big assumptions in that the 7%, 8%, then 7% on from year 4 to 10 is locked in, and it locks future councils into rate increases that work into that. Is that correct?
So that's a total revenue increase. The rates increases are much lower than that 7%, and you'll see that in the agenda that's going to be published for next week. What we're proposing to do as part of the strategy is have the level of rates that are set through the operational budget, and then increase that up by accelerating debt repayments, so that we have a total revenue increase of 7%.
Okay, so the increase comes from where? Give me an understanding of where that will come from.
Paying debt down.
Okay.
So straight into the repayment of loans.
Right, so that's one.
Yep.
Is there others? I mean, are we looking at some other external options? I mean,
So the fees and charges that will increase throughout the life of the plan, that is also feeding into that 7% assumption, and the rates increases for the operational programs as well.
okay, and you said you've made some assumptions around what those rate increases might be. Can you give me an understanding? Are we talking 3, 4, 6?
Between 4 and 5, roughly, at the moment. However, we are just finalising the numbers for next week's council report, so
Okay,
that will come back to council next week.
okay. I'll go to some councillors. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one question. What if the revenue wasn't as high as this suggests? What if it was 5% or 4%? What impact would that have on the debt?
It would have a direct reduction to the available headroom for council.
Have we got an idea of what the scale would be if it was, say, 5%, for example? I don't expect you to have all the numbers off the top of your head, but I'm just trying to understand, if we've got this wrong, what the impact will be on our debt headroom.
Yep, if you give me 2 minutes, I can do some maths for you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, why Scott is doing that, I'll go to other councillors. Councillor Zavellin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm looking at 5.9 of the agenda. There's that table there which shows the potential impact on rates for year one. I thought that was a really helpful table. So I'm just interested in what you were saying about ramping up the debt repayments closer to year 4 and 5. It's my understanding that we'd also be ramping up our capital spend at that time, so our interest costs would go up as well. So I'm looking at that table and looking at the two debt-related costs. That's 6.6% of that 14.9. I'm really interested to know what that sort of looks like in year 5 or year 4 when we are both increasing that debt payment and also our interest costs.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
More
great.
maths for your head, sorry.
I'm going to be very cheeky and say, can we park that question till next week's council meeting? And we will bring the 10-year picture of what those numbers are looking like. I really just wanted to provide some context around that higher revenue assumption in year 1. I couldn't sit here and go, let's increase revenue by, say, 5% in year 1 when our rates increase is much higher. So I just wanted to provide that context to council for that. We will bring that detail back. I'm not trying to avoid the question. It is a very good question, something we've been working on, and it will come through the agenda for next week's council meetings.
Thank you, I appreciate that, Mr. Mayor.
In regards to the 5% question, so if I leave years 1, 2 and 3 as they are in the agenda paper, and then 5% annually thereafter, the debt capacity is 495 million. So that's a 105 million reduction from your agenda paper.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Scott. A couple of questions from me. How much additional debt repayment has been included in those assumptions?
Hard to say because we haven't set the operational budgets yet. So as the operational budgets are set, which is coming back next week, that will determine the level of rating increase that we need as a minimum, and then we will top that up to 7%. So that will move based on the operational budgets that we set or that you provide guidance on next week.
Okay, thank you. Now, in terms of the Nature Calls cost going to an IFF, I understand that the capital costs would be covered through an IFF. What happens to the operational costs of the water side of things? Is there a corresponding reduction in the operational spend that's transferred to IFF?
No, so the IFF vehicle would be used for the capital costs and the costs associated with the capital project for the Nature Calls. The operational costs that we still have today will still be ongoing and still be borne by the council because the asset is still ours at the end of the project. All the IFF does is service the debt off balance sheet. So any costs that we can comfortably and appropriately associate to the capital program can go to the IFF. Anything else becomes a little bit technical and would need to do some work on, but the capital costs and the costs associated with the Nature's Calls project, not the ongoing operational ones, can go to the IFF.
So maintenance and renewals still stays with council, renewals as well?
Yes.
Of that?
Yep.
And those budgets are all included in what we've got in front of us?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all from me.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Scott. Team. Just wondered, Scott, what interest rate assumptions have you made for the debt repayment over the 10 years?
5.5%, and that is due to our swap rates helping offset some of the higher interest rate costs.
Okay, thank you. And I had a question it's gone out of my head now. Not to worry, I'll come back to it. Thank you.
All right, back to you.
I'm not too sure there's a heck of a lot actually more to say apart from referring to the additional tables that were provided yesterday or Monday. I'm sorry, I can't remember which day they were now. And breaking down the subcategories with the total net capital expenditure, We have provided some officer ranking on the strategic programs. We've provided an additional column for externally funded projects, so you can see where officers have assumed a funding source. Now that external funding source is all encompassing, so that includes IFF, Waka Kotahi and other funding sources. Excuse me. We don't quite have the details of exactly every source that's in there, but it is an external funding assumption, so that is the purpose of that column. And the right-hand column on all the attachments is the net capital expenditure or the cost to council in terms of debt.
Okay, so just with the resolutions that are up there, Scott, and I realise bringing forward to council a whole lot of material next week, but we were asking us now to confirm assumptions around annual increases of 11 and then 8 and then 7% going forward. There's not a lot of detail to make that decision on, and I'm just nervous about locking in future councils to, even if it's 4%, that's on the books immediately before we even do anything. And I appreciate that there is a bigger prize at the end. Yeah, I don't know whether you can put any comment back to that.
Yes, I can. So the 7% has been worked off the previous 3 years' increase of total revenue. So it's not a number that we've just dreamt up for that. It is the average increase to total revenue over the previous 3 years in the budgets. The other main objective of that increase is so that we can start to pay down the debt that we have and create a better position for council by the end of the long-term plan. The total repayment over the 10 years, the 176 million that I spoke of earlier, is about 90% of the debt that we have today. So that means by the time the 10 years pass, we have paid off everything that we have today, which is, we believe, a prudent position for council to be sorting towards too. So does that sort of answer?
Yeah, it does. If there was a little bit more context around what the other external, and I get the whole NZTA funding. I mean, every council gets an element of that. Some are more successful than others of getting it. And then you've got others, there'll be some other government funds, there'll be some other funding mechanism, the IFF, but there's a limit to that. So I'm just wondering where, and of course upgrading our fees and charges, which we do anyway. Sorry, I'm going into comments, but I'm just trying to tease out some more confidence for me anyway that this is the right thing to do.
Yep, absolutely. So we will have that detail back next week in line with the operating budgets. This is part of that whole conversation we've been saying. It's very hard to make decisions in isolation because it is all interconnected. But you're right, the fees and charges feed into that. External grants and subsidies for operational programs feed into that. There is some there, and it is a planning assumption. We can revisit it. We don't have to pass it at the level it is here today, but it does have an impact on the debt headroom in regards to the capital program that you're wanting to draft today.
Yeah, okay, all right. Thank you for that. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Could I ask some questions on attachment 4, given the changes that have been made?
No. We're trying to deal with what's in front of us here, unless it links back to this.
It links back to the net capital expenditure column that the officer was just talking about. I just wanted to ask on page 46, for item 1895 Te Motu Apotoa, the 10-year expenditure is set at 13.67 million, the external funding is 3.8 million, and the net capital expenditure you've given is 8.4, but to my calculation should be 9.8. I was just wondering if there's another reason as to why there's that extra 1.4 million there.
That's a great question.
Sorry, that was page 46.
Yep. I'm going to refer you to the latest version of that, and I'm just looking for that. I believe that was one of the figures that got corrected because it doesn't add up.
Okay.
As you rightly point out. I'm just trying to find what page of the additional information that sits on, sorry. Page 11. Yep, so page 11 of the additional tabled items has the correct figures in it.
So what is the correct figure? Because I don't have that in front
So
of me.
the correct capital spend for program 1895 is 13,670, external funding of 3,827, and net capital expenditure of 9,843.
Thank you for that.
Should also be noted that the program immediately below, 2239, is the other part of that program in relation to the design and consent. So that's where the 15 million for the total program comes to, as those two lines items together.
Thank you, I appreciate that clarification. And my other question is probably less related, so I'll leave it there, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just follows up your comment about us locking in future councils. Can you clarify, Scott, on if we were to agree this now, what opportunities are there for revisiting this before the long-term plan? And then what opportunities do future councils have to make changes?
So it can be revisited at any long-term plan item that we bring to council between now and June. We would have to set something for audit in mid-February. Council could revise that assumption following the submission and consultation period, and it would be set in stone at the end of June when we adopt the LTP. This assumption can be revisited every time an LTP is developed, so in 3 years' time you would be able to do that. Yeah, does that help?
Yeah, so would it be fair to say... Sorry. So would it be fair to say it's an assumption that we're working on, but it's actually not locked in for 10 years? It could be changed at any point, either by us or a future council.
Yes, it's definitely a planning assumption. It does have a direct correlation to the debt, which is why we've put this recommendation in front of you. But yes, it is definitely a planning assumption and is not locked in until the final LTP is adopted.
Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just a follow-on question from the Mayor's question in relation to the fourth recommendation asking us to confirm that assumption. Would there be any issue if we deferred that recommendation to next week when we've got all the operational information in front of us?
I wouldn't be able to model the debt for you now.
Okay, so if we wanted you to model the debt on lower percentage revenue assumptions, then we'd need to make changes to that recommendation and to enable you to do that.
Yes.
Okay, and thank you. Just one further question in answer to Councillor Wood's question. If it was 5% from year 4 to 10, then we'd need an additional 105 million. In the Chief Executive's email yesterday, it referred to if we didn't resolve this recommendation, and the funding gap would remain at close to 200 million. So that 200 million, that assumption, based on the current draft revenue increases. So the current draft revenue increases, we haven't been shown that yet, have we?
No, that's coming next week.
Okay. So the difference between the current draft revenue increases and this, is it mostly the debt repayment?
Yes, so the 7% would be made up by making additional debt repayments.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Just try and help if I can. Through the chair, I might just try and help the conversation a little bit. I know that what we're trying to get from you today is the projects and the schedules that you have in front of us, and I understand that we may not be able to model where we might be sitting during the course of the day. However, there are other opportunities for us to adjust things next week if we choose to do so, and also there will be opportunities as we develop the consultation document during January and bring it to you in February to make some other final adjustments. So perhaps let's just see where today goes, and perhaps that recommendation that might be a sticking point at the moment, we do just leave that sitting there for the moment and see how today progresses. Does that help?
Sorry, so you're saying that we don't have to pass that today?
I'm kind of getting a sense from perhaps around the table that if you do lock in that assumption today, then you've got more headroom to play with. However, there is also the affordability test that does need to be put across it as well. If you didn't pass that today and you worked on the assumption that you've got sort of between the sort of around the 180, $200 million mark for projects in attachment 4, there's an opportunity for you still to potentially add in other additional ones as the LTP progresses.
Okay. All right. Councillor Naylor.
Sorry, just further, thank you for that, from the Chief Executive. If we didn't progress this recommendation today, could 2 lots of modelling be shown to us next week, one with the 7% and one with a lower amount, a 4% or a 5%? Or would that be too much work?
The revenue assumption is to model the debt headroom. So what's coming next week is the operating budgets, and that currently has a lower revenue assumption in them than that 7%. So as being a planning assumption, we would bring the entire model back in February. So next week we have the operating budgets as they are with no additional debt repayments in them, and then that would be brought back in February. There's not a heck of a lot of time in terms of modelling, and the paper's due to be published by the end of today.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just make one further comment too? I guess the maybe a non-financial observation, but the time that you're going to spend debating attachment 4 is influenced by the decision you make around the revenue.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you. So we do need to make a decision. Can I just say, if 4 was moved and it got passed, we can always come back to it, can't we? If we look at it and go, this is unaffordable for our community, and we can do that relatively quickly in February.
Yes, absolutely. You're spot on. If council feel that is unaffordable for the community, you can absolutely revisit it. It would mean you would have to look at the capital program again.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, people are up for that, I'm sure. But I don't want to leave it sitting there because it means there may be some lost opportunities. Not that things are a target either, councillors. So that's the point that I'm trying to make as well. Is yes, there may be some more headroom, but it doesn't mean to say we fill it. Okay, well, look, on that case, are there any further questions of the officers before we look at these 5 recommendations? Sorry, is there 5 or 6?
The 6th one is going through line by line.
Okay, yeah, okay, so it's the 5 recommendations. There is none. So look, I'm comfortable to move the 5, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And yes. So we're going to take separately. I'm going to move them as a whole, but we'll take them separately, and 1 separately, 2 separately, and the 3, 4, 5 come together. Okay, 2 and 3 separately, and the rest together. Okay. Councillor Harper, is that what you were signalling to? Okay, 4 separately as well. Councillor Dennison?
Mr Mayor, I just wondered whether you, as the mover and the Deputy Mayor as the seconder, just put in the word draft in recommendation, what's proposed in 4, just draft long-term plan.
Yeah.
Just so we're not tying ourselves
Yes.
in knots. I think that's
I'm-
a word that will add
I'm
comfort.
a bit risk adverse there, so I'm happy to put that in there as well. We've got the word draft in there. Okay, so look, I'll just read those. So obviously 1 and 5 will go together. That council note the updated schedules, attachments 1 and 3, and the amended attachment 2, reflecting the directions of council on the 29th of November 23. Number 5, that council note the risks are identified in attachment 5. And then we go to number 2, that council commit to ensuring the costs of providing infrastructure for a Kātori are met through a range of funding mechanisms. Number 3, that council confirm their Kātori growth programs will be funded via a combination of council debt and external funding mechanisms such as the IFF model or a development agreement as detailed in Amendment Attachment 2. That number 4, that council confirm the planning assumption that total operational revenue will increase by at least 11% in year 1 and at least 12% annually for years 2 to 10 in the draft 2024-34 long-term plan. Okay. All right, I'll open it up for any other commentary. And we'll go to 1, we're going to just vote on 1 and 5. Commentary on the whole lot, but we'll vote them in those groupings. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. To support most of these recommendations, but would like to move an amendment to the 4th recommendation. I'd like to test that in the room at this point. I think if we progress as the officers have outlined with at least 11% and at least 7% annually for years 2 and 10, we're creating a whole lot of headroom to fill before we've had a real opportunity to test whether our community can afford those debt repayments and afford those sort of rates increases, acknowledging that it's not all rates increases, but I think that's an unaffordable position for our community, and I think we need to be working towards a smaller envelope at this point to put out and draft. All of us who have been through this process before know that there's additional things that come up along the way. I do not want to fill all the potential space that we can possibly create with an additional debt level of 250% at this point. I think it would be much more prudent for us to exercise some discipline at this point and have a more reasonable capital program to put out as a draft to our community, and we will hear from our community if and where we might have got that a little bit wrong, but I think that's a better position to engage with our community rather than the sort of rates increases that would be needed to progress with based on the 11,777,87 sort of picture. So I'm moving an amendment to change that 7 to 5, which is seconded by Councillor Wood, and I'd encourage you to support that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Does anybody else want to speak to the amendment first? Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Well, I won't be supporting the amendment. And I think it's important to note that all this is at the moment is a planning assumption. It's not a commitment to a rates increase in any particular year. It's a planning assumption as to what the income for council will be. It's up to us and future councils to determine whether it's still going to be appropriate in 3 years' time. It's up to us and future councils to determine how income might be generated for the council. There's no commitment to a particular rates increase. And so I think to portray it as being that is somewhat misleading. The other thing I would say is that the majority of programmes that we're going to be considering in attachment 4, which I think is now attachment 9, whatever, the ones that have been labelled strategic, they are the programmes that majority of them were in the last 10-year plan, and majority of them were in the last 10-year plan because the community asked for them. So we've already made a commitment to those programmes. and to decide at this stage that those programmes won't be funded because we're not comfortable with an assumption about planning, I think is a step too far. I would much rather that we included the majority of those strategic programmes, particularly those that have been suggested from the community. And in that, I would like to acknowledge the huge amount of public that are here today to listen to this debate, who are here to support the community projects that they've asked for to be included in the long-term plan. And so, at the very least, in terms of the draft, I think the assumption should be that those programmes that we've committed to previously and those ones that have been asked for through previous submissions should be included. The officers have suggested a planning assumption of 7% on average of increase in income. That doesn't mean a 7% rates increase. It doesn't mean that we have to commit to doing this in the future. It just means this is what we're using now to determine what programmes we'll put in the draft. I'm not quite sure why people are getting hung up on it. These planning assumptions have been made in every other long-term plan. Perhaps they haven't been discussed as explicitly and put in front of us as explicitly before, but nevertheless they've been there. And so at this stage, I would much prefer that we work with the 7% assumption, that we determine as we go through the attachment what we want to include and what we don't, and then we see where we're at the end of that. There's plenty of time for reflection. There's plenty of time for community submission, and I'm just not happy to go ahead on the assumption that we'll be doing a 5%. Apart from anything else, officers have got a huge amount of work at the moment, and modelling the 5% is just another amount of work to add on to them. So really, councillors, I urge you, let's just go with the modelling that we've been presented with. Let's do the best we can today on attachment 4. And then let's see where we're at in February, and we can make adjustments then if need be. We haven't even looked at operational expenditure yet. That's all to come. So please, let's not get hung up on a planning assumption. Let's go ahead and do the best we can for the community. Thank you.
Before I go to the next one, could I just ask you, Scott, a question? So the 7% gives us, what is the headroom?
The 7% gives you the 601 million as total available gross debt over the 10 years.
What does the 5% give us? You did say it earlier. I'm sorry, I didn't write it down.
495 million.
Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Harper.
Thank you. Thank you to Councillor Naylor for putting up this amendment. I'm happy to support that. For me, it's about affordability for our community, and I think going out with something that's a bit more reasonable. So I would prefer to go out with something that is more reasonable for our community. I'm happier to support that, and I think that we need to, as a council, when you're looking at years 2 to 10, it's a lot to fix in, excuse me, a lot to fix in annually, and I think fixing in 7% is too much. And I think that's why fixing in 5% is a lot more affordable. So I would prefer to sit at 5%, particularly when you're looking at external funding that's not so assured going forward, that we're not going to get some of the funding that we've had in the past. So I think we need to look at what we can tighten our belts on going forward. So that's why I would say more like 5%.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not going to support the recommendation. It's very similar to Councillor Johnson. I think at this point of the program, the 7 was actually based off the last year's 3-year rolling average. 5's just an idealism that think we're going to be holding back the community or advancing the community, and I think all of those at this point of the process is just hypothetical. And around the disciplines, there's 2 parts of this, in my mind. One is around discipline about retrenching back the revenue we'll gain, which is only going to suppress every other decision and leaving the optionality out, whether we're making the decisions or having consultative input from our community. Their input is going to be limited at this early point, at 5. And so the discipline in my mind is around the, how much headroom we keep through that long-term plan in those considerations when we're considering expenditure. And I think that's where the discipline really needs to lift. and that's why I'll oppose this amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Councillor, I have to push back against some of the comments that have just been made. Let's not get hung up on a planning assumption. We're doing the long-term plan. Everything we're doing today is a planning assumption. So I can't accept the fact that, oh, well, this is just an assumption we're making for the plan that we're doing. Well, yes, exactly. That is going to frame the conversation that we have today. That's why we're all here discussing it. What decision we make on this particular item has a considerable impact on the decisions that we make through attachment 4 and around our strategic assessment and funding. So I think it is entirely appropriate that we get hung up and have a conversation about it at this stage, as this planning assumption will shape what our 10-year plan looks like. I want to talk about a few things. So, I mean, we've already heard today that incorrect previous revenue assumptions are having to be corrected through increased rates payments in the years that are coming in the near future. So the revenue assumptions that we do build into these plans do lock us into a certain level of expenditure and do mean that if we get it wrong, we have to make corrective higher rates increases. That's what's just been told to us in the officer comment before. So this is to do with your risk appetite, councillors. I have a low risk appetite for assuming that we are going to make more money than we potentially will. That's where I sit. I would rather we assumed a 5% revenue increase, and if it was 7% as we go through the process, well, that gives us additional headroom to fund additional projects as we go through that process. But I would rather start with a more conservative and a lower risk estimate rather than a more excessive and higher risk estimate. So that's the practical decision we're making here. If revenue's higher, well, that gives us additional space, and that gives future councils additional space, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. So, yeah, I think it's appropriate to discuss this. I think it's safer for our community to assume a 5%, and I'm very happy to support this.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just commenting very briefly is that yeah, this is this is just simply a revenue assumption, and I'm sure that council officers have given it a great deal of thought in terms of coming to these numbers. We will have plenty of opportunity in the coming weeks and months to interrogate the veracity of this, and we'll be able to adjust it accordingly and rescind it if necessary. By going with these numbers, it provides us with the headroom, and headroom equals options. So let's not cut ourselves off for options now, and a reminder that we're just preparing now for a consultation process. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. Briefly on this, I do have some sympathy for where the mover and the seconder are coming from in terms of having a strong concern around affordability of what is a very significant LTP that sits in front of us. And I'm sure that we all hold that concern at some level. What I find around this is that I am unable to support it because I do think from a process point of view it is very much putting the cart before the horse and ends up setting us up where we are not able to really proceed in a considered way through Appendix 4, looking at each of those items on their merits, which is what we've been doing right the way through and what I'd hope we continue to do through the way. As well, in terms of a perhaps early defense of 7%, I was very, very pleased to hear officers indicate that that was including a repayment to debt. We cannot afford to be the council that sets up a future where every single LTP is a bumping against debt headroom kind of conversation like we're facing now. So we actually need to have a planning assumption that gets us back into a moderate zone around debt levels, and that does this. Hitting a 5% would not be a prudent way forward from that point of view either at this stage in the process. So I'm very much in support of the substantive, the 7% that was there, and having a chance to look today item by item and look in February at how appropriate the 5 versus 7 is. Thank you.
And right, a reply back to you, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Yep, I acknowledge this is just an assumption, and it's for that reason that I think we need to get our assumption to a closer level to what we feel comfortable to consult on within our community at this point. By my calculations, if we were to impose an 11% rates increase on our community and then 7% for outer years, we're effectively... I am talking about rates increases. So the basis that the officers have provided 7% is the average of the last 3 years, which was 7%, and those were rates increases. No. So I'm talking...
It's income we're talking about, revenue.
Okay, so point made. If we were, okay, the point I was making is if we did proceed with an 11% rates increase and 7% rates increases for the rest of the years, then that would double people's rates over the next 10 years. And I don't want to go anywhere close to that. I realise that the numbers in this paper is about total revenue, but my knowledge of capital programs that we've got in Appendix 4 is that if we approve all of that, that is a huge amount of operational spend in terms of planning, reports.
It is capital spend we're talking about, is that correct? Can I just ask the
Can I
officer?
just, Mr Mayor, could I just get my
Yeah.
sentence out? If people actually hear what I'm saying, they might realise that their assumptions are not correct of what they think I'm about to say.
Okay,
Okay, what I'm saying is if we approve the capital spend that is in Appendix 4, that will mean an increase in operational spend for reports being written, for planning being done, and for that to be then implemented. And that what we've seen in recent years, that those costs usually escalate. The number of programs in Appendix 4 is unreasonable to deliver an affordable way for our community. And if we set this at this point with this much headroom, the temptation will be that we'll spend all day and the majority of us will not take anything out, much at all out of Appendix 4. And it's for that reason that I think the starting point that we should be putting reasonable parameters around the headroom that's created for Appendix 4. And for that reason, I would urge you to support a more moderate approach. This is a time for our community. Discussing with my colleagues at work yesterday, they said, do your colleagues not have common sense to realise that we can't afford our mortgages and our groceries, let alone those sort of rates increases? So even when the revenue, I acknowledge it's revenue for these numbers that are in here, but as we know, most of that revenue currently comes from rates, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
okay, thank you. All right, so we're just going to vote on the amendment only. Thank you. And that is lost, 7 votes for and against. Okay. We will have to vote again, please. Lost, 7 votes for and 9 against. Okay, so we're back to middle of comments on all of these, and we'll go back to the top of this. No, 1 and 5. So these are the first two that we will vote on. Are there any further comments? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I just want to make a general comment about the amount of headroom that we're informed around, which I guess is the updated schedule and amended attachments. I don't know if colleagues recall, but when we were first presented with this data, I did ask a number of questions and commented that I really just did not understand how we suddenly didn't have the headroom to do the projects that had been in the last 10-year plan and that had been calculated and funded. And the answers I was given, and they were correct up to a point, were about the increase in infrastructure costs and the need for council to take on the water renewals and wastewater and stormwater as a result of the affordable waters reforms not going ahead. But it was only last night that we were informed that some extra debt repayment had been missed off the budget. And that is quite significant. That's 176 million of debt repayment that wasn't included in the original papers. And so I just think it's important to comment on that, because some of the work that we've done up till now, we made decisions based on not having the correct figures in front of us, and there may be a need to revisit some of it. The other comment I want to make is that the fact that the correct headroom has now been put in front of us should not be used as an opportunity to bring in extra cuts and extra reductions in service. Had we had this figure in front of us at the start, some of the comments about what we need to do might have been different. And so I just think it's really important that as we go forward, that we understand that staff have done their best, and I'm not intending to criticise them. This is moving at pace. It's a moving feast. I understand that. There's no criticism of staff here, but I want elected members to be clear that this 359 million headroom is what we should have been looking at from the start. And had that been in front of us, I think it would have been a different conversation. So I'd just like you to bear that in mind going forward. Thank you.
Okay, we've got 1 and 5. Are there no further comments on the entire lot? Councillor Naylor.
Mr Mayor, I'm just wondering if there's any chance that we could move recommendation 4 after we've gone through attachment 9?
I think the officer said that we couldn't do that. That was answered from the officers earlier.
No, the question was, could we leave it till next week? What we've got in attachment 9 are decisions around.
But it's the same difference. They still need to. I need, as the mayor, I need an understanding of what the headroom is. Yeah. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I concur with Councillor Johnson's earlier comments. Also wanted to briefly comment around the capital renewals in terms of where that's landed, given that was something I put forward at our most recent LTP meeting and was widely supported by council, and appreciate colleagues for that support. Attachment 5 to me was quite a sobering read in terms of implications there, and I want to acknowledge that we are, by continuing to take this track, and noting that we're not confirming it today, but that we're continuing on the track, at least so far, we are accepting a higher level of risk than we might otherwise have. I feel that's been well outlined to us in attachment 5, and while it does give a level of sobriety to what we are facing here, it is I think prudent that we do continue with the levels as indicated in the recommendation. Also wanted to thank and acknowledge officers for the rapid work to make those adjustments, and also particularly pleased on page 55. I think it's the first time I've ever seen a forecast looking out 100 years in terms of what we might be facing as a community. And while that's well beyond our lifetime at this table and our lifetime full stop, I think it is very useful for us to have some of those longer term views in front of us. And so thank officers for the work put into their analysis around the capital program, except that there is a risk appetite associated with that, but would ask the colleagues continue to support that approach. Mr. Mayor.
All right, we've got 1 and 5, and we'll vote on that first, please. And that it's passed 16 votes for and none against. Thank you. We'll now move through to 2 and 3. Okay, it's 15-4. Thank you. There's one councillor didn't vote. Yeah. Declared interest, so don't panic. So we're now on to 4, please. Can we get 4 up? And we're just getting 4 up. And that should be changed. Okay. So we'll just get that to be viewed. Okay, so number 4 is around the assumptions. So we'll vote on that, please. And that is passed 10 votes for and 6 against. All right. We will have a break for 15 minutes, councillors. And there's a cup of tea, because we've got a few people in the crowd. We've got a cup of tea in the link span there for you if you'd like one. So councillors, back into the chamber at 10:45, please. Kia ora tātou, welcome back everybody. It's a popular meeting, a few people in the gallery, it's good to see. Right, we will now move to our next part, which is around Capital New Attachment 9, strategic, and we are assuming programs are in, and then we will need to work at what stays in and what comes out. So we have a number of recommendations for debate around that, and thanks to colleagues for sending those forward earlier. Before I go to those, is there any comments from the officers before we start this part of the process?
No further comment from us, except for using the most recent attachment. That would be the only comment.
Okay, to be really clear, it is the tabled attachments 9 in the papers, in the tabled document.
There are two agendas, the agenda called tabled items, and there's attachment 9.
Yeah, tabled items, attachment 9. That makes sense?
It's the second set of papers.
It's the second set of papers that came out. And apologies, and it's the one that has the, to make it really clear, the officer rankings are on them as well, so that might make it a bit clearer. Okay. All right. So we're going to start, and just bear with us, councillors. I'm pretty confident we're going to get through this, but we just need to go through the process. So we have under general here, and this is our first one, around, and I'll go to Councillor Naylor in a second, but the capital programs, excluding programs 2410 and 2415, which is around CCTV cameras, around 2452, which is around water for community gardens and signage, and 967, which is around edible fruit trees, be excluded. That categories by officers listed as priority 3 be removed in the drafting of the LTP 24 to 34. Councillor Naylor, over to you.
Just before I speak to that, Mr. Mayor, can we just clarify from officers program 1133 at the top of page 10? Was that the program that the chief have referred to that was now in operating? So
That's a grant, so it's actually in the operational side of things.
I just thought we should clarify that for the sake of the meeting. Okay, thank you. I am moving this in an attempt to, not have to go through some of these items line by line. I really appreciate the work that the officers have done in categorising these, and the criteria that they used is outlined here and on page 7, and that's a really objective, I think that's an objective way to categorise these items. So these category 3 items, by no means I'm not suggesting that it wouldn't be of value for us to keep them in, but in an environment where we are assuming everything's in and needing to take things out, I think the category 3 items is the best place to start. So I'm proposing that we remove those for now for the purposes of the draft. I think the total of that before the changes was around just under 10 million. I think the officers might be able to tell me, I did see that somewhere. So, the Mayor has already outlined the exclusions because the CCTV one is a separate recommendation that will be dealt with. And the edible plantings and the community watering were quite low investment for the value that they provide. So I've excluded those for the purposes of this discussion. Thank you.
Okay, look, Councillors, I will support this, and I was pretty protective of the CCTV camera activity, and Councillor Hancock and I have been stressing that we do need to ensure that our community is safe, and one of those areas was around improvement on our CCTV cameras and also the monitoring of those. So that is excluded from this. But look, I just want to make a couple of comments. It's a small amount of money, but Councillor Naylor is correct. We do have to look at the total affordability. So we've got things like heritage markers, a events trailer. Those things can still happen from our community, whether it be trusts, service clubs can pick those up. One of my favourites, and I'm prepared to put stuff up that I absolutely champion as well for affordability issues as well. The Chinese garden and the work by the community can still continue in the background. It just means that it may come in year 4 when we have another look at this in 3 years' time. The lighting around the River Precinct, quite a big ticket one that. I think that's a nice to have at this stage when we're going out with relatively high rates increases. The other one was around, and we heard from Rangitane, what their preference was to us in terms of priority. So, you know, our River Park Marae Tarata, again, that was lower in the priorities for them if cuts had to be made. I mean, there's many others which could come under, and I'll look at our LED lighting, which could actually come, and if it's that important, it could come out of the low carbon fund. It's something the officers could look at there. Look, there's many things, as I said, placemaking as well. Again, relatively low. These are lower level items, and I think it's a good prudent start. It'll get tougher as we get on, but I think this is a reasonably good start to make, councillors. So I'd urge you to support this. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question, and I may have missed it during the preamble because I was busy searching for the programmes. Would this mean cutting 2204 citywide street racer prevention?
Yes, I believe that is one of them. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to briefly comment on this, there are a number of Category 3 line items that I have plenty of appetite for dismissing. I do not, however, have appetite for dismissing the whole lot, even with those few carve-outs. And I'm concerned that the drive for efficiency here, in terms of meeting perhaps, process is potentially taking us down some paths that we don't actually want to go for. I'll highlight a couple programs that I do have concerns about. One is 2349. That is, for a start, largely co-funded. It is also our most significant contribution into the Te Apiti Master Plan. I'd hate to get that swept off the table at this point. Likewise, Program 1077, it is our native biodiversity contribution within the public spaces in this city, something the community highly values, reasonably low cost. So there are a number of things. That LED lighting was an interesting example there, you know, where I think we could be making some cuts in these level 3 priorities, but I do not want to see us sweep the whole lot aside. So I'd urge you to vote no, so that we have the chance to look at individual programs on their merits. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Yes, similar to Councillor Barrett, I don't really, I mean, there are some programmes within this that I might be prepared to see go, but there are some significant programmes that will be caught up in this that I would not like to see go. Amongst them, the biodiversity enhancement through native planting and the street racer prevention programme. And there are others as well, but I just think this is a little bit of a sort of quick and dirty way of doing it. I would much rather we just debated a programme, and if we decided that for whatever reason it could be removed, that it was removed. rather than these kind of catch-alls, which, whilst there might be some appetite for some of the programs in them, there's certainly, between us, there's going to be no appetite for including them all. So I would encourage the mover and seconder to look at individual programs rather than this kind of a catch-all. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. To follow on from the previous two speakers, tend to take the same approach here. My concern is because we're moving at pace and there's been a volume of information being provided even in the last 24 hours, that sometimes we don't have line of sight to the implications of withdrawing particular programmes and without an opportunity to ask some questions about that. So my preference would be to go through and debate those, have the opportunity to ask questions of the officers for any unintended consequences, perhaps, of that. And and even something like the Chinese garden, which you referenced, Mr. Mayor, in theory, yes, that could come out, but we haven't explored how that relates to the proposal to not do the capital works for Wild Base, what that means for those existing exotic aviaries, what that says to the community. There are bigger questions than just going, this is a 3, we should take it out. So I'm keen to keep things in and then, unfortunately, go line by line if we have to at this stage.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And similar to the previous speakers, when I got the list and I got the list of various motions last night, I actually went through what is now attachment 9, line by line, just looking for what it is that I thought might have some appetite for exclusion with Councillor Naylor's notice of motion before us. I think there are too many in here which actually have got some question marks over for us to actually take this approach, although I do appreciate what both Councillor Naylor and Councillor Wood are trying to achieve. So I think we probably do need to pay attention to and find out some more detail around some of those programs and how they link into other programs within the overall long-term plan. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to say I appreciate the comments from other councillors and I understand where you're coming from. This was born out of a desire to get things done in a more efficient way and an understanding of the frustration that councillors have had in the past of going through things line by line. So the result of not voting for this is that we will just go through it line by line, and if that's the approach we want to take, that's perfectly fine. I mean, I will still be supporting this, and I know Councillor Naylor is considering, given the comments of a number of councillors, excluding a few of those particular programs so that we could still do a catch-all on a number of them that we broadly all agree that shouldn't happen, but the ones of particular controversy can be debated separately. But just to reinforce to councillors, this wasn't born out of malice or trying to be quick and dirty. This was just born out of trying to get things done in a more efficient way. But if we want to do it another way, that's perfectly fine.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just 2 comments on this. One is the broad-based assumption that everything's in and then we've got to take it out. That's probably a fundamental position that I haven't agreed with. I think we should have gone with the previous long-term plan, and every new program being proposed should have been considered and put into the plan. Would have been a view I wanted to express right from the outset. But the second one is a comment that I made just in recent weeks around the 3 Ds, around decreasing budgets, deleting budgets and deferring budgets, and what this is proposing that they be removed out of the long-term plan. And I just don't think that's just out of sight, out of mind. Leave it for the never never. When I'd rather go through with some consideration where the program should be just deferred out to the year 4 for another consideration by a new council, or decrease so we can actually have provision if we're going to do the private-public partnership type of approach. Just deleting them out of sight is not the approach I want to take, and I'm quite comfortable to spend the time. We've got the next week all scheduled aside for meetings at the last minute for quite important business. I'd rather go through and put the time and considerations that each program is worthy of. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Harpiter.
I agree. I have to say I'm going to disagree. I'm not going to support this recommendation because I think we should be going line by line through every program, which is very painful, but I think that's the only way that we should be debating this. I don't think this is the way to do it through this recommendation, so I won't be supporting this recommendation.
Okay, right, a reply. Back to you, councillor.
Thank you, colleagues, for your comments. In light of those comments, with the seconder's support, I would also like to add to the exclusions 1077, biodiversity, 2349, Te Apiti, and 2204, the Street Racer one. Now, I recognise we may end up, if this isn't supported, we will have to, I presume, go line by line. I agree with Councillor Dennison's comments. I've never supported the assumption that all of this is in unless we take it out. There are a number of items in here that have got no council mandate to even be there. And I think that's a really problematic way to start if then we've got to take things out that we've never really even put there in the first place. So this is, yes, it is, I don't think it's quick and dirty. I think it's pragmatic, given the amount of items we've got here today. If we debate them all, we'll be here till Christmas. And I don't particularly want to spend, Christmas here. So, so I would urge you, you know, this is not just, this is the officer's good advice around the categories, and I do appreciate that there has been an objective tool put over creating those categories, and so it's not going at this blind, it is simply saying this is a good place to start, and I'd urge you to support on the basis with those excluded, so the ones that are excluded can still be debated separately, but that does exclude many of the items that colleagues had brought up in their comments. Thank you.
Councillor, we've added some new information in that right to reply, so unfortunately we won't be able to accept those additional programs, so it will stay with the 4 originals. Just understanding orders, we cannot add them in. If we let this go, it'll happen every single time.
Present a new recommendation then?
No, you've got a right to reply.
I mean, it's been done plenty of times before where someone's changed something in light of.
No, we're going to vote on this, okay. And if this fails, you've got options after that. Yeah. Okay, councillors, we will vote on the recommendation, or the recommendation that's in front of us on the screen. Thank you. And that has failed, 4 votes for and 12 against. Okay. Now moving towards our community safety and health, the next one up is that program 2410 CCTV citywide new cameras, program 2415 monitoring safety centre, both proceed in the drafting of the long-term plan. I've moved that along with Councillor Hancock. Now, you may ask, why have I put this up? Because I feel this has to happen for our community, so I'm ensuring that it doesn't get deleted at the 11th hour, so I'm putting it up as a program that we continue to support. Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. I appreciate that council officers have assessed this as priority 3, and we would have to consider there has been some significant improvements made to the CCTV systems around the city in the last 3 years. However, that was starting from a very, very low base. In fact, our CCTV system was pretty much non-functional in recent years. The response from council officers to a previous query from me was that this program, that's the 2410, that is a relatively modest investment over the 10 years, and that would actually allow us to actually increase the number of cameras by only 7 per year on average. The second part of, which is the other program there, relates to monitoring. And one of the things that our CCTV system has had a real deficit in recent years is that there has not been 24/7 ability to actually monitor what's actually going on around the city. So this $85,000 actually just provides council officers with an opportunity to explore various options to have 24/7 monitoring of our camera systems. And when I say our camera systems, this is really about not only just Safe City, but also to protect council assets around the city. So provide us with some oversight of what's happening there. And you'll know that we've had several high-profile situations of willful damage in recent years. Other centres around New Zealand actually do have 24/7 capability for our CCTV monitoring. Noteworthy is Hamilton, Napier, Wellington and also Hawke's Bay. Safety in our city has been hotly debated in the last 3 years, and we've had youth issues that have been very, very prevalent, and thankfully there has been some interventions put in place. However, that is a situation which for now might have been dampened down, but those situations will actually arise again. So we need to actually have good safe city systems going on in the within the CBD. So really just keeping this in the long-term, the draft long-term plan, that just provides us with the opportunity to take this out to public consultation. I'm absolutely confident and certain that the retailers around our city will be very supportive of ensuring that we keep building a system which is effective. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just to point out to colleagues that if this resolution fails, that there is a backup one that Councillor Harpenter is seconding, that the program 2410 is reduced by 50%. Now that would allow some investment into additional cameras, but this is an area where I think we've taken, you know, we've done the heavy lifting a little bit, where it should be shared with other partners. This is something I think the police or other partners should perhaps be putting up some capital, not just the council. So I won't be supporting this recommendation, but would prefer the alternate that I've outlined.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I will be supporting this motion. I'll just quickly go through a few reasons why. The first one is that over the last few years, many members of the community have communicated significant concerns about safety, particularly in the CBD, and it's been a constant source of concern, particularly to councillors Hancock and the Mayor, where you know, there have been people beating a path to their doors about the concerns around safety in the CBD. And that's not just safety for people walking around, it's also safety for property, including our own property, I might add, that has been vandalised many times, including the cenotaph. Secondly, it's a headline goal of council to have a safe city, and this programme directly contributes to it. And I wouldn't like to see us losing our Safe City accreditation or anything like that. It's important to us, if we're going to maintain our reputation as a good place to come and study, particularly for international students, that we invest in having a safe city as far as we can. I think just finally, the people who are putting this forward, the Mayor and Councillor Hancock, are those who have been on the front line in terms of trying to deal with some of the issues over the last few years. And so I'm happy to take their recommendation that this is an important plan to maintain safety in our city. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Actually have a significant amount of sympathy for the position put forward by Councillors Naylor and Harpeter around the new cameras. But noting that the motion that's in front of us is new cameras, but also the Monitoring and Safety Centre. So on that basis, I will support the motion that is in front of us. I do want to note that I think there is a role for the bid in this, if we're looking at retailers in the central city, and particularly that Programme 2410 about cameras. I think that's a conversation that we should be having with the City Centre Business Improvement District if there is a need perceived there, as Councillor Hancock has mentioned. In response to your comments, Mr Mayor, about not wanting to see this withdrawn at the 11th hour, I just want to note, and primarily for the community in the gallery, that nothing that goes in today is guaranteed to make it all the way through. This is just drafting. And so if we have views about things that should be in, we will need to continue to advocate for that. And if the community have things that they want to see in, they will need to continue to advocate for that. Nothing is signed in stone at this stage. Thank you.
Councillor Zabellan.
Ngā mihi, Mr Mayor. I'm very happy to support this program. Likewise, I was fortunate to be invited to attend some of the meetings that we had with cross organisations in regards to some of the antisocial behaviour that we saw from youths in the CBD earlier in the year. And I do want to, I guess, acknowledge all the groups that came to the table, and I don't believe that we are solely doing the heavy lifting, because we had our MP there, we had Oranga Tamariki reps, we had CBD business owners, the bid was there, police, the mayor and the CE, other councillors, the Safety Advisory Board. So we did have a lot of people working on that at the time, and this was one of the things we said that would be our contribution. The other things that happened were a beat cop and a lot of work into a monitoring facility, and really acknowledged at the time that there's not much point to having a whole bunch of security cameras if no one's monitoring them and no one is able to respond to things when they're happening at the time. So those are two sides of that same coin to make this an effective piece of work that can really have a long-term effect. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that there has been a lot of collaboration. Some of those business owners do have their own security cameras and have been compiling that footage and sharing. So there are other people coming to the party too with this. It's not just us. We're playing our part here. And finally, I think we have seen a significant improvement in the CBD, and we're just starting to see those results. I'd really not like to see us cap that at the knees before it really starts to get going. So I'm really happy to support this. Please do for our CBD safety. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr Mayor, o tira tēnā tātou. I want to support this because as a former principal, I probably had first-hand experience of installing CCTVs within 3 school environments, and that was in response to vandalism, also assaults, not necessarily in school time, but outside of school time. And it was able to perhaps provide safety and security. The school community appreciated having it. We were able to get evidence. If there was any damage to property, we knew exactly who the offenders were and who we were looking for. The cameras are placed when you have a good policy. The cameras are placed in public areas, so there's no issue with regards to privacy, because it is areas where people are at or walking around. But it just gave us that opportunity to provide a safer environment, and I know that it provided the outcomes that we needed to ensure our community was in a safer place. We've seen and despaired over the vandalism that's happened often on a regular basis within Te Marae o Hine, and I too support what Councillor Johnson has said, and also Councillor Zebulin about the wider community, business communities, and how they've been suffering. This would give them some support as well as ourselves, and I'm sure there are ways around monitoring this that would benefit everyone. Also, if we are moving to be a smart city, given the technology that we have available to us in this day and age, this could be integrated with existing systems and systems that would be upgrading. Nō reira, tēnā koutou.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll rise to actually support the recommendation before us. While I share the sentiments that have been expressed by Councillor Naylor, I also believe that, while, it is the role of the police to keep the community safe, but we also have a role to play as a council to keep our community safe as well. So I believe that this is one of the levers that we have outside of town planning and street lighting. This is also one of the levers that we have to ensure that people have got a sense of security or a sense of safety around our CBD. So more than happy to support this. I believe this will go a long way actually in making sure that businesses around our city or businesses in the CBD will feel supported, because they've been coming to us over the years, actually expressing their concerns through the PAMI bid and through the advocacy with the Chamber of Commerce as well, and have lobbied a lot of councillors as well around the table. So I think this will be a good way for us to also give them a sense of security and to also send a message to them to let them know that, you know what, the council supports you. And the council hears you, because we've noticed and experienced a lot of antisocial behaviours in our CBD. And CCTVs has also been shown and proven to actually reduce crime rates around cities as well. And this has been seen in a lot of cities that have become, smart cities. We can take Christchurch, for example. The mayor and I, we've been in Christchurch, we've seen what they're doing around smart cities, and it's shown to actually have reduced the amount of antisocial behaviours, and CCTV have been shown to prove as well to be a deterrent against crime. So I'm really happy to support this, and I'll encourage members on the table to actually support it as well. Thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I certainly will support this, and definitely a big fan of CCTV. I would certainly like to see our council basing ourselves on the Hastings Safe City model with 24-hour surveillance in this building, and definitely more of a focus on prevention. I'd also like to see more catching, convicting, keeping our city safe, that's for sure. As a councillor on the PNDHAG, Defence Heritage Advisory Group, Cenotar's been vandalised 8 times now. There's more damage on it today, I'm afraid. More tagging. Not good enough. So certainly, CCTV, big fan. Retailers, we need it. Maybe there's an option for public funded model fundraising. I'm sure there'd be an option there. So please support this. Thank you.
Okay, councillors, just to wrap up, just a quick writer reply. Look, for those that probably aren't aware, we've come from a pretty standing start, a pretty low base, so it's not as if we've got fantastic oversight out there at the moment. It has improved, but we've still got a long way to catch up to the likes of the Hawke's Bays and others. Look, there's already been a lot of collaboration already. I've sat on safety advisory board meetings where there's already people doing some of the lifting already, and I think this is our contribution. Safety is a community issue, and the council does need to play a role. We're not the only ones, but we do need to play a role in that. And I agree, the bid, the business community, youth providers, police, they all need to be involved as well, and they will be. So please, if you can look at this as being our contribution, and a pretty minor one in the bigger scheme of things, will go a long way to keeping our city safe. And let's be honest, if you lose that safety, certainly in your central city, it's very hard to gain that back again. So this sends quite a good message to all our partners as well. So please support it. We will vote. And that is passed 14 votes for and 2 against. Okay, so that supersedes C. We'll now go to community support. And the first one there is that in the drafting of the 2024-34 long-term plan, council include funding for 2 new public toilets per year where there is demand at 3,000 each. So, Councillor Hapeta, I'll go to you.
Thank you. This is program 161. We currently fund 1 toilet a year, and my wish is that we fund 2 toilets a year. This has come from, we have a lot more people in the community that are using more of our walkways and more out there in the community, being more active. So this is now wanting to actually have more toilets that are available out in the community and all parts of the community, west, east, north, south, and not just have them located in the most popular places. So this is now, the toilets cost $300,000 to get a new toilet, and in this recommendation it says where there is demand. So I'm not saying put a new toilet in every year just because we wish to, it's where there is a demand to do it. So that's why this recommendation is saying this. I do think that when you want to go, you want to go, and I'm trying to be very respectful about that, but it is about putting these amenities in places where people need them, and that's what I think we should do. So I'd like your support on this if you'd like to support me. Thank you.
Councillor, if I could just ask a question of you while you've got the microphone. So effectively, this program will be doubled. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was just wondering if I could ask a question. I was just wondering if officers could comment on what the operating costs of an additional public toilet would be per year. I know, we've seen with Memorial Park significant damage in operating expenditure. Just wondering
It's
what it is.
listed underneath on operating costs, so you can probably make that assumption yourself.
Apologies, Mr Mayor, I've missed that. Oh, thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, toilets, they're a perennial issue, generally come through every long-term plan and annual plan. So I'm really sympathetic to Councillor Harper raising this, but for me, this is just at the wrong stage of the process. We've got a programme in there for 1 toilet. We can go out with that. The way to establish if there is demand to increase that is through community consultation. At that point, if that's what we're hearing in community consultation, then I will happily look at a proposal to triple this budget. But at this stage, I'm not prepared to do that. So I'll be voting against it and look to see what the community have to say on the need to have places to go when you need to go. Thank you.
All right, would you like to write a reply? Okay, we will vote, please. And that has failed. 4 votes for, 11 against. And somebody didn't vote, but we know who it is. Okay, we'll move through to our next one. Okay, E, that in the drafting of the 24-34 long-term plan, council include program 2343 citywide new community hubs, upgrades to Te Pātikitiki Highbury Centre and the Pacifica Centre and the new Awapuni Centre and the leased multicultural hub. Proceed in the drafting of that plan. Okay, we're just going to get it updated. Okay, that the drafting of the 34 long-term plan include Program 2343 citywide new community hubs, upgrades to Te Pā Tiki Tiki Highbury Centre and Awapuni Centre, Program 2440 Community Centres, Pacifica Centre expansion, and Program 2350 Cultural Facilities, the new multicultural facility. Now, I've moved that. It's been seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillors, it's no surprise there's people in the gallery. This is a community-led initiative, really, all of them. So we've had delegations to council from both the Multicultural Council, from the Pacifica Council, from our communities of Highbury and Awapuni as well. I can recall all of these programs going back at least 1 and some 2 and 3 LTPs, and I've got, yes, 10 years. So this is something that we've got to go out to the community with. Yes, there's some big dollars attached to the majority of them, but what are we here for? We are here for this sort of work. Yes, we have our core services around our waters, our pathways, our roads, etc., but we also provide community centres. And this is something that is what I'd call pretty core business for us. This isn't funded by you're not going to get a lot of government funding for a lot of this. So this is certainly what we should be doing. We're unique with the multicultural part of our community, and they deserve a much bigger centre. Anybody that's gone up to their offices can sense that it's a great office facility, but it's actually not fit for purpose for a very, very vibrant and large multicultural community. So we know that food goes with both our multicultural community and our Pacifica community, and the same can be said for their home at Bill Brown Park. And just want to acknowledge Sunny and the rest of the community here. That is in desperate need of some expansion, and they've come to us and been very, very patient, I might say, about how we deal with that. Now, the Awapuni Centre, we've got a grand opportunity to do something that would future-proof our largest suburb for in a generation. So we have been approached many times about this from not only the community, but the pieces of land that could be utilised for that, and the current owners of that. Now, just finally to our Highbury community, Te Pā Tiki Tiki is a fantastic facility, and it's well utilised by that community, but it's tired and it does need an upgrade. That, I think, is an absolute necessity. So I'd ask you to support these. We're remembering that we're going out to the wider community of Palmerston North to ask them if they agree with this, if this passes. So I've opened up a hornet's nest because everyone wants to talk, so I'll go to the first one, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And thank you for putting this up with the Deputy Mayor to second it, because I think it's important leadership from you to the rest of Council and to the community to show that you have a concern for the communities that have come to us and asked for these facilities. So I want to also acknowledge all of the stakeholders and members of the public who are here today from every one of these projects, actually, giving up their time to come here to put a little bit of soft pressure on us to make sure that these projects continue to be in the draft. And I think I very much appreciate your time and your commitment. But as the Mayor said, all of these community facilities have been requested for some years now. This might be new budget lines, but it's not a new ask. these facilities have been requested for very many years, and those of us that attend a lot of community functions, in particular in the multicultural area and in the Pacifica area, will attest to the fact that there is not enough facilities available of the right size and capacity to accommodate those communities' needs. We've already had the feasibility reports. We know what needs to be done. We've a rough idea of what it will cost and a plan of what years that it could be done. And I feel that these communities have waited long enough, quite honestly. I would struggle to be looking people in the eye if we were to put this off further. And I'll be honest with you. Some of this money that we'll be needing for this, we've had some funding from government that came to us through the Better Off funding for some of the preliminary work, and there may well be other opportunities for external funding for some of these projects. This is basically about social infrastructure. You know, we're spending over $1 billion on actual pipes and roads and everything else type of infrastructure. But this is the social infrastructure. These are the things that help our community come together and help people meet one another. I mean, Councillor Isabella and I were at Bill Brown at the weekend, and we heard some lovely stories from newcomers to the city in the Pacifica community who just recently moved to Palmerston North. Someone had invited them along to the Matua Ola group, and they had found friendship and community there within a few weeks of arriving here. And isn't that exactly what we want to be able to provide for the community? That kind of social cohesion and being able to combat loneliness that occurs a lot in older people, for example. I mean, clearly I could go on about this all day, but I'll try not to, test your patience. I will just say, though, that the city's growing. It's also growing out towards the west, and many of these facilities are over that side of town, and we need these. This is not a nice to have, this is a need, and I strongly hope to get your support. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Oh, I've jumped up the queue, Mr Mayor. I don't know why we're doing it this way. All of these 4 programs are already in the budget, and it makes it very difficult to have a genuine conversation about the 4 separate items that are in here. So the alternative motion that I've got regarding particularly the Awapuni Centre, I think is a different proposition to the other 3 programs. It's a $30 million cost, not a $4 million cost or lower than that. So I find it very difficult because I don't want to support this, because I think that we should support Te Pā Tiki Tiki, the Pacifica Centre and the new multicultural facility, but I think the conversation about the hub and spoke model that we're proposing for the Awapuni Library is a separate one. And it's a separate one that comes at the cost of $30 million to this council that deserves a debate and discussion of its own. And so we've effectively put a gun to councillors' heads and saying, you have to do this for all of them or none of them, and I find that a very difficult position to be in. So I'm not going to support this, not because I don't support Pacifica. There is no motion on these lists to strike the Pacifica Centre. There's no motion on these lists to strike the multicultural facility, and there's no motion on this list to strike Te Pā Tiki Tiki. So the only one on here that we're actually genuinely having a conversation about in this motion is the Awapuni Centre. And so in that light, I'm going to give my argument why we should look at an alternative motion for the Awapuni Centre, but my comments are not related to the other 3 community centres that are in this motion here. So look, I have an alternative that in the drafting of the long-term plan, we reduce the budget for the Awapuni Community Centre from 32.6 million to 3.47, which provides full funding for Te Pā Tiki Tiki, the Highbury Library, but doesn't for the Awapuni one. And I want to give my reasons why. Firstly, there are alternatives to how we look after the City Centre Library when that's being upgraded. There's a significant amount of empty, leasable space in the CBD that could be utilised to provide libraries facilities while the Central Library is being upgraded. So we don't need a 1,500 square metre brand new facility in Awapuni to meet that demand. There are other ways that we can support it. I think we need to get real here, Council, as to what a modern 21st century council needs to provide. And the hub and spoke model, in an era where communication was difficult, the internet wasn't around, transportation was difficult, and access to information services, it made good sense to have bespoke miniature libraries in every single suburb. We don't live in that age anymore. COVID has shown that we can provide library services and those services largely through online means. And we've seen from the information that was presented to us last week that library services and library usage across the board, across every council in the country, has gone down post-COVID. And so do we need to charge ahead with a $30 million brand new library in Awapuni? I don't think so. The place of the current Awapuni Library is a 6-minute drive from the CBD. It's a 12-minute cycle. It's an 18-minute bus, although that's probably going to get shorter as the new bus service comes in. Digital use and connectivity is changing. And if we were in an ideal world where we had plenty of budget and plenty of money to do whatever we wanted, absolutely, I'd support a new 1,500 square metre, nearly gold-plated library in Awapuni. But the reality we're facing is we've got to find hundreds of millions of dollars, not just to get under our debt limit, but to be at the absolute max of what we can afford to do, putting other councils in a position, future councils, where they have no headroom and no space to fund any other strategic programs. And so I support the 3 other community centres here, but I don't support that one in particular. I also want to make the point of cost escalation, although it was last week it was 29.4 million, this week it's 32.6, so goodness knows it's gone up 3 million in 1 week where we'll be at by the time we actually get to implementation of this project. But in all seriousness, projects like this are rife for cost escalation, and I would be concerned that if we put in an estimate of 30 million, what it will actually be by the time we get there. It's going to cost $2 million to develop the plan to build the Awapuni Library over the next few years, and so I think it's appropriate at this time we make a decision. Do we support the traditional and perhaps old-fashioned hub and spoke model and spend the $2 million developing that plan? Or at this stage, do we make a decision that we're going to go with an alternative route? With the redevelopment of the Centre City Library, we have an excellent opportunity to build a fit-for-purpose, modern, 21st century library which services the needs of our entire community. And I think I would rather we build a fantastic Centre City Library that services our whole city. We have to keep in mind here, councillors, we're a regional city. It's not actually that hard to get around in our... It's from the furthest point of town, it's a 15-minute drive to the city library. So we are a small city. I don't know if we do need to have brand new, modern, 1,500 square metre facilities all across town, or if we have one really good, well-built, well-designed Centre City Library. So I'm not going to support this, and I don't even know what I'm asking the Mayor to do. I'd hope that we could remove the Awapuni Centre from this recommendation and discuss that separately, given it deserves a separate discussion. But I won't support this, noting that that doesn't mean I'm not supporting Te Pā Tiki Tiki, the Pacifica Centre or the Multicultural Facility. There's no motions to get rid of them, and so it's really only Awapuni we're talking about here.
Councillor Zabellan.
Ngā mihi, Mr Mayor. Rising in support. And I would be very proud of a draft that went out to our community with these programs in it, because they would deliver real results for people. And I just want to quote our new government: National understands public spending has no value if it does not deliver real results for people. So, Mr Mayor, I want to thank you very much for your comments and for calling this core business. That means a lot to many people in this room, I have no doubt. This is community infrastructure we're talking about. So, well, find my notes. I just wanted to start by talking about a mate of mine who comes to the Te Pā Tiki Tiki morning tea every now and then. And the first time that I met him, the librarian sat next to me and she said, "Can you talk to that guy? It's his only opportunity to be social, probably all month. And sit on that side because he's deaf in one ear and he won't hear you." So recently we had Steve Bramley in the chamber, and he told us that our library service is second in the country only to Christchurch, and that is why our librarian knew what that time meant to him, how important it was for his well-being. She knew what his obstacles were to making connections, and she knew which side was his good ear. So before I even get into any of the value proposition, I just want to say that I'm so proud of the service that we provide, and it's because of the people, our people, who are pouring their heart and soul into their job and their community, and they're doing it on the smell of an oily rag, on second-hand furniture, and pretty much no significant capital investment for 30 years. So I'm not going to go into 1,000 anecdotes about how valuable these services and places and relationships are, although I Good. Instead, I want to talk about why this is a smart spend to present to our community for their feedback. What do we get for those dollars? And we are looking at a long-term plan which is going to offer less for the residents of the city, and it's going to cost more. And a massive proportion of that cost is laying the foundation for future communities who don't yet exist, and that's happening at the expense of the interests of our residents who are existing here in the city right now, and they're bearing the brunt of overworked infrastructure and the upfront costs of the shiny new infrastructure simultaneously. With this spend, we can ensure that this long-term plan offers something that is overdue and much needed, that serves a significant portion of our community here now in a critical way. And we offer future-proofing and strengthening and sound investment in our community infrastructure that will support our communities to support themselves now and in the future. Lots of things to say about all of these places, probably not enough time, but Te Pā Tiki Tiki does all the things the library does, but it is also a community connector, an education hub for practical skills. Let's Grow Highbury works out of there, Seed Library, the Marakai. It's a safe haven for students and adults alike. If you've been to a Zappo magician show in the school holidays, you'll know there's a health and safety issue of how many people get crammed in there. And the important aspect of the TP design is that it can be separated out, that it is a library and it is a safe haven community facility that can operate after hours for the youth safety. I'm sure those who were there at the annual budget hearings that I chaired in the evening will remember the submission we had from the Highbury whānau about the young people who are seeking refuge in the park there at night when there are no other safe places for them. This would be a life raft. The Pacifica Centre is oversubscribed but punching so highly above its weight in terms of the community actually stepping up in a massive way through COVID to deliver key health programs and programs in an area of town that is underserved for medical facilities, but also those programs, the digital literacy for the matua. We just saw them graduate and have their certificates on the weekend. They're being run out of the centre. It's an actual hotbed of learning and upskilling, developing and connecting, and that will only expand with a community teaching garden coming. What the community gets for this fairly modest spend is immense. Anyway, I'm just going to jump to Awapuni, seeing that's the flavour of the day. Yes, it's a lot, but it is a fraction of the growth cost for a Kautiri, for example, but it's still a lot. So what do we get for this spend that makes it a smart choice? For one thing, aside from the library, the civic green space and the courtyard areas are so needed in Awapuni. Apart from boho, really comfying up Patama Road, there's so little placemaking, places to rest, green spaces usable for families and children. It's not even a public toilet if the library's closed. So aside from all those all the average benefits you expect, there's a massive amenity boost. But it comes with, most importantly, the increased ability to cater for a much wider catchment of users, which is necessary because our population is growing, and that's where it will be growing. And this hub would theoretically be stepping up to be Palmi's main library for a good 4 years. I just wanted to say there that it's not the decanting service that is the driver. That's the driver for the time.
Councillor, we can...
Yep. Excellent, thank you.
Great. That is a perfect ending. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I'll be brief. You know, I'm also proud of the services that our staff provide in terms of libraries, and it is the people that deliver those services. I'm also do agree that we do need some investment in buildings. Our community facilities report showed many buildings across our community that people can gather and can be used for people to gather. We don't need to own all of them. I would have also preferred this to have been separated out along with Councillor Wood. There are aspects of this that I would support, but I can't support it in its entirety, which is a $37 million commitment, or 36.8 council commitment. Even last week when we were provided that report, even the consultant acknowledged that he would have advocated for the Awapuni Centre be 1,000 square metres, but some other people talked him into making it 1,500 square metres. You know, I think we've got to reconsider the scope of some of these programs. In an ideal world, we'd say yes to everything. If we carry on down this track, we won't get to where we need to get to at the end of today. So I won't be supporting this. I certainly would support some of the programs there, but I can't support it, all of it, in its current form. I do think we need to rethink the level of investment that we make in buildings. It's not just the capital, but there's the ongoing renewals and maintenance additional to this that we would be committing to as well.
Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship, o te rā tēnā tātou. Well, I know I'd like to support Councillor Johnson and Councillor Zeppelin. Their line of thinking is very much aligned to my own. Te Pā Tiki Tiki Highbury Centre continues to serve a densely populated community, one that we know is on the lower socio-economic bracket. By improving and modernising this well-used facility, it creates a safe, enhanced experience for its users who are of all generations, organisations and local schools. We know that many of the people who live there don't have the luxury of having a car like we do, that we have families who are at home, who don't have resources. Many, and I know from the perspective of being a principal, some people make the assumption that every child in New Zealand has a laptop or a digital device. I can tell you they don't. And so these facilities, they're more than just a library. They're a safe place. They're a place where you can go and learn and everything. The Pacifica Centre, tēnā koutou, kia ora ana. The Pacifica community is a vibrant community. In fact, they're all vibrant, made up and well supported by all Pacifica nations. They have long held and continue to use the facility at Bill Brown Park on a daily basis during the day, morning, noon and night. And they promote social connection and cultural transmission. They are a growing population used by all generations. Their contribution to our community, our city, is immense, culturally, educationally, through employment, and socially, and I could go on. The proposed modifications are modest. If I had my way, it'd be a lot more enhanced, but I think they are very modest with what they want. The enhancements to the current facilities would make it fit for purpose. It would future-proof and add value to the experiences or the opportunities that the Pacifica community could offer and deliver to their community, which is culturally appropriate. The security also of knowing that they would have that facility fit for purpose would be, no doubt, mana enhancing for our Pacifica community. The Awapuni Centre. Now, all of these communities or areas are growing. We've heard that, we know that. But they provide multifunctional spaces where we could achieve our goals as well. We want to be an innovative and growing city. We want to be creative and exciting, connected and safe communities. We want to be sustainable and resilient. We have to think outside of the box. We have to be responsive to our communities. And with regards to the Lease Multicultural Hub, they too have made modest requests of us, and we have seen the benefits of what they deliver and offer to not only their immediate community, but the wider whānau of Palmerston North City. And in fact, I would say that they are, all of those groups, our Pacifica community, Te Pā Tiki Tiki, and also the Multicultural Hub, they are exemplary. Awapuni is one of the oldest suburbs in Palmerston North. The library where it operates is very small. We know that they had flooding, the building wasn't very good, but if you went to the celebration of the students or the young people who went through the reading program that the library offered, it was well supported by young people there. And they're engaged in reading, they're engaged in learning, and we need to encourage that. I quite agree. Our community have come to us and they've said, we want this. So, all of this I support for those reasons. Kia ora koutou.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the interest of brevity, I'll just say what she said, what she said, what she said. I think the additional information I'd like to add in at this point is to reflect on the officer's report that came to council last week and say what's important to me here is not just the individual merits of these programmes, of which there are many, manner enhancing, a life raft, a safe place, but the fact that this hangs together as a programme to deliver a sustainable way forward for our library and community services over the next 10 years. When we start to move individual elements around, we put that plan at risk. But accepting that this is our draft, we'll go to the community and we'll see if they think that's an important consideration in this. My sense is that they will think this is very important, but we'll ask them. And the only other thing I wanted to add is I don't think there's anything here that precludes us seeking or accepting external funding for any of these projects, should anybody be minded to do so. And I expect that some of this is fundable, but for me what's important here is setting strategic direction that enables a sustainable plan for the future of these services. And that's what putting this programme forward like this does, and I do not support it being separated out for that reason. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm sensing the fact that there is good support for the motion on the table, so I'm going to be very brief. This assumption or notion that the modern age of the internet is giving everybody access to all the information that they want is actually untrue. And I'm talking about the aged population, people who live in deprived areas, and, as has been touched on, our young people. The assumption that they've all got access to the internet and can miraculously access all the information they need is just not true. These places are gathering places for people. It's about an interface, and that is very, very important. This is about building social capital and creating social cohesion. And if we want to build functional communities, that is our investment and our investment to make. It's about creating coherency in our communities as well as resilience. And those are my comments, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I could go on for quite a long while on the community centres, because the community centres are really the centre of our city. Just have a look at the ones we do have in existence. Try and get in there. You've got to book months and months ahead. I could talk about Awapuni and Pacifica Centre, etc., and I'm all totally 100% for it. But what I would like to mention, back in the 1990s, this city was the first city in New Zealand to start an ethnic community group. It was then called the Multicultural. It was then changed to the Multicultural Council, the MMC. The MMC represents so many different organisations. It's not just one ethnic group. It's what we keep saying, 120 ethnic groups in the city, and the MMC is the centre for them. They have facilities, which is a good office space. But you go up to there and some of their meals they have there, it's so cramped, it's ridiculous. They've now been forced to go out to other community centres to hire them because they have so many people turn up for the things like the newcomers dinners. The Ethnic Council is in desperate need of a facility where their members can meet. They need a decent kitchen, they need tables and chairs. They don't just meet with 10, 20 or 30. I've been to some of the ethnic group meetings when there's 200 or 300 people there. You know, they hire the barber hall, etc. This community crows about how multicultural we are. We hear it all the time. It's about time we did something to show our community how much we appreciate the multicultural community in the city. Try and go to a doctor or go to the hospital. If it wasn't for immigrants, you'd be waiting an awful long time. I think we should show some appreciation to the immigrants in the city, which is increasing rapidly.
Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just briefly, I fully support program 2343, 2440, which is Pacifica and Highbury Centre, and 2350, which is the Multicultural Centre. Fully support those three. With Awapuni, I do really have an issue with the building of 30 million. I have that issue, and it's more about building it and owning it. And I did challenge the consultant about us spending that much money, and particularly since we currently lease that building. And I did ask why we aren't going down that track of leasing it again. I don't understand why we have to own all our own buildings in terms of library space. So that is my issue with the library for Awapuni. I would like to look at a different model for the Awapuni Library rather than actually building it and owning it ourselves. So that's my issue with Awapuni. I understand it does need a new building, but not necessarily that we should own it, looking at a different kind of model going forward. So that is why I probably won't support this, because they're all lumped together, but I do support the other three programs. But I have a real issue because they're all lumped together.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Tēnā koe, Mr Mayor, o tēnā koutou, o taima nei, ngā manuhiri. Koutou ngā kai kauni there, colleagues. It feels beautiful that I get a sense that there's a lot of support in the chamber today. And I share all your sentiments and thank you for your support. But I just wanted to say thank you to our visitors here today and everything that's been said about the facilities, but we actually haven't said thank you to them. They are the ones that cook in their houses and take the kai to the centres with their grandparents, their parents and the children and the grandchildren. And Councillor Hancock is exactly right. It's about those connections. And we're very grateful that we're able to support those whānau to live their best cultures amongst us in our cities, if that makes sense. So thank you very much. And I also share the concerns around the Awapuni Centre. It's a big number. But my concern is also about it's attached to another redevelopment part of our city, and I'm wondering if it's deserved of a separate conversation. Anore, tēnā koutou.
Mr Mayor, can I move a procedural motion under 2.14.1 of that motion under debate?
Okay.
Just with respect, we've had 9 speakers speaking for this recommendation that's already in our plan, and we've got a balance of business that's beyond us. So,
Yeah, Councillor, look, I'm happy with that, but actually it's probably one of the bigger issues in our city at the moment. Yeah. You've got a seconder, but I can still speak as the chair. Yeah, yeah. So look, councillors, I make no apology that these are together because they're all community hubs. I mean, to say that we're separating them out. Yes, yes.
you'll still get a right of reply, as I understand it. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I have the right of reply. I thought I did. Anyway, no, it's. Yeah, I'm sorry, I do have the right of reply first, and then we vote on the procedural motion. So, well, I'm getting advice to say that I have the right of reply first. Look, to make you all happy, we'll just vote on this. I find it bizarre that you're cutting in halfway through because we're nearly finished, but we will, yeah, I agree. Look, I agree, councillor. It's a long day, right? And I know what you're trying to do to speed it up. So I do have some sympathy in it. But, you know, we were just at the end and you've cut people off, which I think is a little unfair on a big issue. But anyway, we'll vote on this. We'll vote. Well, councillor, I'm in the chair, right? So we'll just vote on it. Yep, we'll vote. Procedural motion, we'll just vote on it.
Are we voting on E or are we voting on taking it? Yeah, just to take it to vote.
Yep. Now we're voting on E. That's. Okay, we're just going to put the procedural motion to E. All right, and we're going to vote on E. No, we're voting on E. All right. Hmm. We're just going to vote on the procedural motion. All right. Could have been a lot easier done, but anyway. All right, we will vote when we get that up. On the procedural motion. That is passed, 9 votes for, 6 against. Okay. We've taken the vote. Look, I'll just very quickly, I'll make no apologies that we've and I'm going to be brief, that we put all the community hubs together. And there's no gun to anybody's head. You either support it or you don't. And I appreciate that we've gone on a little bit. If you go to community hubs and libraries around regional and metro cities around New Zealand, Horswall's one in Christchurch, Ruatuna, Hamilton, Rotorua is another. The $30 million that we're talking about around Awapuni is actually relatively small change in some of those facilities. And we're talking about a suburb, our oldest suburb, but also our biggest suburb of Awapuni. It's 20,000 people. And look, I'm not sure where the old-fashioned Air New Zealand hub and spoke model came from. It's not a central city debate. It's around Awapuni. So it's a community facility. It's different to the central city. It's different to Roslyn. It's different to Ashurst. And it's not to be homogenised into some sort of central city debate. And that's for another day. And I can see that's going to be a debate as well. But look, we should be proud of our library service. And absolutely, the scope for this project was well informed by the community that they serve, or serves. I mean, it wasn't made up by the consultant. It was actually the best feasibility study I've seen since I've been in the chair, and I thought it also came out with an excellent strategy on what our libraries and community centres and hubs can look like going into the future. It gave us a bit of an understanding of what it looks like. So I thought it was an excellent piece of work. But anyway, we've seen that there is support for this, so yeah, thank you. So we will vote on E finally. So I'll ask you to support this, please. And that has passed 13 votes for and 3 against. Okay. Look, councillors, I think we'll break there. It's a good time to break. And we'll see you back in the chamber at 1:10. All right? Thanks. Yeah, I mean, that was a bit...